In 1985, a 53-year-old engineer flew to Taiwan to take a job nobody else wanted. He had spent 25 years at an American chip company, been passed over for the top job, and left. The Taiwanese government asked him to build a semiconductor industry more or less from nothing. What he built instead quietly became one of the most important companies on earth, and it won by refusing to do the one thing everybody assumed a chip company had to do. This is a series about the companies that run the world and the rivals they left behind. Today it is a company most people have never knowingly used, and yet almost certainly rely on 100 times a day. A company in Taiwan called TSMC, and the giant it dethroned was, for a while, the most admired technology company in America. To see why TSMC was strange, you have to understand how chips were made before it. For decades, a chip company did everything itself. It designed the chip, and it owned the enormous factory that built it. Intel did this, Motorola did this. The factory was the whole point, the crown jewel, the thing that separated the serious companies from the amateurs. If you could not afford a factory, you were not really in the business. And a factory was brutally expensive. A cutting-edge one could cost billions, and it went out of date in a few years. So the barrier to entry was almost insurmountable. A brilliant engineer with a brilliant chip design, but no billions, simply could not compete. The design in their head was worthless without a factory around it, and factories belonged to the giants. Morsh Chahang, the man who flew to Taiwan, saw the gap that everyone else had stopped noticing. What if a company built the factory, and only the factory, and then rented it out to anyone with a design? It would invent nothing of its own. It would compete with none of its customers. It would just manufacture brilliantly for whoever asked. In 1987, that became TSMC, and at the time it sounded almost humble. It was, in hindsight, one of the great business ideas of the century. Because the moment a world-class factory was available for rent, you no longer needed billions to start a chip company. You needed only a design. An entire generation of companies was suddenly born, firms that designed chips and owned no factories at all. We call them fabless, and they include some names you know very well. Nvidia is fabless. Apple's chips are fabless. Qualcomm, AMD, and hundreds of others design the silicon and then send it to Taiwan to be made. None of them could have existed, at least not so easily, in the old world, where you had to own your own factory. TSMC did not just build chips. It built the entire ecosystem that made modern Silicon Valley possible, and then quietly became indispensable to all of it. Here is the number that matters. Of the world's most advanced chips, the very smallest and fastest, TSMC makes somewhere around 90%, not a majority, very nearly all of them. Every iPhone, most of the chips training artificial intelligence, the brains of new cars, the fastest processors on the planet, are made by this one company, on one island. Now, TSMC is not literally the only company that can make chips. That is the crucial distinction. Plenty of firms make ordinary chips. The rivalry that matters is at the leading edge, the cutting frontier, and there the field of genuine competitors has narrowed to almost nobody. So who is actually trying to beat them? The most serious challenger is Samsung, the South Korean giant. Samsung can make leading-edge chips, and it runs a foundry business that competes directly with TSMC. But Samsung carries a problem TSMC deliberately never has. Samsung also designs and sells its own chips and phones, which means a customer handing over a secret design is handing it to a company that also competes with them. That conflict, real or merely feared, has kept many of the biggest customers loyal to neutral Taiwan. Then there is Intel, the very giant. This whole story began by dethroning. For years, Intel was the best chipmaker in the world, and then it stumbled, missing a series of manufacturing deadlines while TSMC pulled ahead. Now Intel is attempting an extraordinary reversal. It is trying to become a foundry too, to make chips for other companies, the exact model it once considered beneath it. It is betting tens of billions on catching up. Whether it can is the biggest open question in the industry. And it is worth remembering the ones who tried and quit. Global Foundries was spun out of AMD to chase exactly this frontier. In 2018, it looked at the staggering cost of staying in the leading edge race and simply stopped, choosing to make older, cheaper chips profitably instead. That decision tells you something important. Staying at the frontier is so expensive that a well funded company looked at the bill and walked away. Because that is TSMC's real moat, and it is not a secret formula. It is money at a scale that is difficult to comprehend. A single new leading edge factory now costs around $20 billion, more than most countries spend on almost anything. TSMC spends tens of billions every year just to stay one step ahead. Every year, it raises the cost of entry, and every year, the list of companies that can afford to follow gets shorter. There is a second moat, quieter than money and harder to buy. It is the accumulated knowledge of making these chips at massive scale without ruining too many of them. This is called yield, the share of chips on a wafer that actually work, and it is learned painfully over years from mistakes nobody writes down. A rival can buy the same machines from the same suppliers and still produce far more defective chips, simply because they have not made the mistakes yet. So we reach the uncomfortable question this series keeps returning to. The world's most advanced technology now has a single point of failure, sitting on an island in one of the most contested stretches of water on the planet. Nearly every government has finally noticed and is now spending enormous sums trying to build fabs of their own, on their own soil, at costs they once found unthinkable. But undoing this will be slow and staggeringly expensive because the concentration was never an accident or a mistake. It was efficiency, compounded for 40 years. Every company, every year, made the sensible choice to use the best and cheapest factory in the world. And 1,000 individually sensible choices added up to a single, collectively fragile outcome that nobody actually chose. Which brings us back to Morris Chang and the job nobody else wanted. He did not invent a new chip, or a new kind of light, or a new material. He invented a new answer to an old question about who should own the factory. He decided his company would make everything, and own nothing that competed with its customers, and that single strategic idea turned a latecomer on a small island into the company the entire modern world now quietly runs on.